Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on digital battlefields, navigating the legal, regulatory, and ethical frontiers. This webinar is brought to you by the TMT committee, which is the Technology, Media, and Telecommunications Committee at the IPBA, which is the Inter-Pacific Bar Association. Thank you all for logging in. My name is Aaron Kamath. I lead the technology, media, and telecommunications practice at the law firm Nishit Desai Associates. I have a wonderful panel, with me today, all qualified, well-respected professionals in their own fields, and I'll come to their profiles in a bit, before we get into the meat of things. But thank you to the chairs of the committee at the IPB, the TMT committee, Doyle and Miriam for giving me this opportunity to moderate the panel. To kick things off, Miriam, Rose, do you want to say a few words to get things started?
Thank you, Aaron. So, hello, everyone. My name is Miriam Pereira. I'm the co-chair of the TMT committee of the IPPA. Welcome to today's webinar. So, the rise of cyber attacks has created a new frontier with unique challenges to the security of our systems, as well as the very framework of legal and ethical conduct across the globe. So, hopefully, you will gain a better understanding of these unique challenges with today's great panel of experts, which will be moderated by Aaron. So without further ado, I will now turn the floor over to you again, Aaron, to begin the session. Thank you and enjoy, everyone.
Thanks, Maros. So just to give you, a sense of what we're going to speak about in the next 45 to 50 minutes, right? Cyber warfare or cybersecurity incidents, cyber attacks, we've seen a tremendous growth, in volume as well as damage caused by it in the last couple of years. Impacted parties involve governments, state departments, large businesses, organizations, non-profit, as well as individuals, like one of us. These kind of attacks have become more complex from a technology perspective. They've become more complex from also a compliance and a regulatory perspective. And today it's not so simple as installing, an off-the-shelf software to protect yourself against attacks because given the complexities involved today, and we'll come to some of those. What are we really getting at here? These kind of cyber attacks, for instance, the attack on, the Change Healthcare, the ransomware attack last year affected the whole US healthcare system and caused a massive amount of loss in medical data and insurance related data. We had a major breach, with the UK Ministry of Defense, and confidential sensitive data relating to UK troops were breached. We had major attacks on US telecom companies, like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, by Salt Typhoon. Subscriber call data, metadata, location data, all compromised. Various US departments like the Energy Department, were compromised. Companies like the BBC, British Airways, British Library. So what we're seeing is large-scale attacks, ransomware or otherwise, where there is a massive business disruption, loss in sensitive data pertaining to governments, as well as loss in personal data. What does that entail? At least from a monetary perspective, we're looking at, this year potential of over $1 trillion in losses spread across financial losses, business operations and downtime, and even brand, reputation losses, right? What we're trying to do, in this webinar is understand the complexities, understand how, as professionals, we can advise our companies in-house, advise clients, or even, partake in the whole ecosystem to combat these kind of cyber attacks. Without any further ado, I'll introduce the speakers. I'll start with Ben Foraker, who is the managing director and head of Japan G3. We have Jay Choi, who is the chief strategy officer for the cybersecurity division at SK Shieldis. Jyotsna Jairam, who's a partner with the technology, media, and telecommunications team at Trilegal. Cora Fott, counsel at Chandler Mori Hamada, and Liling Tong, who is a partner with the technology, media, and telecommunications team at Raja, Darrell, and Law. So I have a wonderful panel of five distinguished individuals in their field, and we'll kick things off with Ben. Ben, given the context, over the next couple of minutes, tell us about the increased complexity, the landscape, and sophistication of these attacks that we're trying to delve into.
Sure. Thank you, Aaron. And thanks also for the opportunity to be on this panel. Just to put myself in context, I'm not a lawyer. What we do at G3 is we're an intelligence investigations firm. So in the context of cyber, we offer cyber advisory to clients. We do both reactive and proactive support. So a lot of our work is really helping clients to understand the nature of attacks and how to protect themselves against attacks, obviously trying to be as proactive as we can. So, I mean, just to kind of give I guess, a high level view of the current environment, obviously as technology increases its capabilities and our reliance on technology increases, so does the cyber threat. I think we've got several key buckets that we need to consider, and probably we'll elaborate on these during the course of this webinar. First of all, I guess most important, state-sponsored cyber attacks. So state actors utilizing their own resources or criminal organizations to conduct cyber sabotage, disinformation campaigns. We've seen a lot recently around elections. It's made us very distrustful of certain information that we may be reading. Governments being targeted, businesses being targeted, and individuals. So it's a kind of a state-sponsored crime in a way. I know Russia have recently been discussing legalizing patriotic hacking, which is obviously a concern. We have the advent of quantum computing. So that's a potential risk to encryption methodologies. I know, Aaron, you called out the UK a lot there in the introduction. There's a lot of authorities such as the UK National Cybercrime Security Centre advising organizations to prepare for quantum computer hacking by 2035. There's the more traditional ransomware phishing attacks, but they've become a lot more, I guess, intelligent in terms of how they attack systems and companies. Encrypting victims' data, demanding a ransom for restoration, often coupled with threats to release the data publicly. And obviously data is expensive. Data is where they make the real money. AI coming into play. I know we'll talk a lot about AI, but AI is increasing vulnerabilities. AI is increasingly difficult to prevent attacks against because obviously the algorithms, etc., keep changing. So there isn't really sort of an up-to-date software that will continue to strive to help protect against that. We've seen more investigations where deep fakes have been used to target individuals at companies. And I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And basically anything that, the Internet of Things, anything IoT devices, etc., often they lack security measures that are I guess, sufficient to protect against exploitation by cyber criminals. So yeah, hopefully, Aaron, that's a kind of an overview of where the key threats and the current issues that we seem to be dealing with.
Thanks, Ben. That's a great context setting. But you mentioned one term, AI, and no technology discussion is complete today without mentioning AI. So I'll pass over to Jay, and what is the role of AI today in both causing large scale attacks as well as combating and mitigating the risks involved?
Think, thanks, Aaron, and good to you on this panel as well. AI and cybersecurity nexus is not a new concept. The concept has been around for a quite significant amount of time, and I think you can approach this like AI in many ways. Whether you want to look for a room for collaboration through by encouraging the tooling for analytics, so it's a speedier and more accurate analysis. Or you can actually look at this in the context of weaponizing AI to create some form of advantage on the traditional and conventional posture of cybersecurity defenses. But nowadays, and that's what's been used. And then, of course, there is an angle around automation when it comes to defenses against cybersecurity, defense against cybersecurity attacks. So it's around improving data analytics. It's about weaponizing for some. And then the last concept is trying to encourage orchestration and automation that ensures the quicker responses to potential or attacks that are happening in the environment. Now, I think where we have seen massive changes, and in the context of legal, is how do you train those models in a responsible way? And I think there is data ethics involved in that, but there is also part around making sure that you have the right authority to be able to change environment if you need it to be. And then, of course, there is an angle around potential operational disruption, which is how do you ensure that AI does what it's supposed to do, and then to make the mitigation that it's supposed to mitigate. And I think, the critical aspect of where things can go wrong when you rely on too much automation is seen with the outages with CrowdStrike or Microsoft as a classic example. So, I think the balance will always be there, but I think right now, what we see with a lot of customers in South Korea, but also in further afield, is trying to embrace those two elements from organizational standpoint. That is, how do you improve data analytics, and how do you ensure that you can respond to cyber attacks quicker through defense mechanism and automation. And I think that pattern and that trend is most likely to continue for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Jay. Before we continue, I'd urge attendees, participants, please post any questions that you have for the panel in the Q&A. And we're trying to make this as free-flowing as possible. Don't wait for the end of the session. Post any questions or comments that you have, and we'll pick it up live as we speak and go on with the session. I'll pass on now to Jyotsna. Now that we've understood some of the increased use of technology, the role of various actors, involved in such attacks, it's important to understand the legal framework. And I pass on to Jyotsna to talk about, international treaties, major jurisdictions across the globe, in terms of what is actually the framework involved in preventing, combating, and remedying cyber attacks.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks for having me here. So just very quickly, I think, we've been about 5 minutes into this discussion, and it's already clear that it does come with a level of sophistication that both domestic laws as well as international frameworks need to continuously sort of update to be able to mitigate, right? But yet, if you look at cyber warfare itself, there are certain common elements that you would see across these incidents that happen, of course, in different parts of the world. So, of course, we spoke about state involvement and state-sponsored cyber warfare. But if you look at what, often is the target or the focus area of these incidents, it is critical infrastructure. You mentioned energy, Aaron. You've mentioned telecommunications. We're looking at digital payments, financial systems, right? So all of these become core areas, right, for attack. And that is, in fact, a common element across jurisdictions. That's something that we have to sort of be agile and nimble about in terms of defense and response strategies. What we're also dealing with are rather hybrid warfare tactics, right? So we've seen, of course, military tactics, we've seen disinformation, but it's interesting to see how all of these are also transforming into or manifesting into ways of attack, using technology, something that's entirely automated, and as Jay mentioned, weaponizing AI as well. Right now, what becomes important is in dealing with all of this, as far as the legal framework is concerned, there's always an interesting balance between legal proportionality, right? So you look at what are we going to do with civil liberties, what are we going to do with privacy, yet when we're dealing with attacks of such large scale, which require governments as well as private participation to in fact mitigate. So it's a very interesting balance in terms of understanding the interplay with privacy laws as well. The reason I'm setting this context is, while we've sort of established that there are common elements across jurisdictions, we don't unfortunately have a comprehensive framework at an international level that would allow each jurisdiction to respond to these attacks in a similar manner, right? So there is a significant degree of harmonization that is yet needed, but instead we are dealing with domestic cybersecurity legislations, which often are what are applied to these kinds of attacks. Of course, they do have geopolitical considerations. You could see responses, for example, in the form of sanctions that are applied. But from the legal framework perspective, you are dealing with each domestic cybersecurity legislation. So I'll just quickly touch upon, the EU, US, Singapore, and India, and I think Lailing and Korafort will touch upon some other jurisdictions as well. But if you look at how most of these laws are designed, right? For example, in the EU, we have largely the NIS2 directive, you have the EU Cybersecurity Act. These do focus on defensive measures. There are some proactive measures, but it's largely what we need to do should we be faced an attack of this manner. And in the EU, it's largely about coordination within member states. But it doesn't really touch upon what you do when it happens across different territories. So suppose there's an attack that involves, let's say, India, the EU, and the US, right? How are we going to harmonize our approach? Similarly, I think India also we do have some changes in the law, but it still largely remains defensive, right? So as far as proactive measures are concerned, I think that is something that we can draw an example from Singapore, because what they have done is, in addition to common sort of reactive strategies on notifying regulators, notifying data subjects, if there are sectoral regulators involved, bringing them into the mix as well, right? What they're also looking at are proactive measures to actually build resilience to specific target areas. So I think digital economy is a huge focus. And so Singapore's laws are also trying to address how we can be more resilient, right, in deploying the processes that we have in the first place in order to mitigate these attacks, right? And of course, in the US, you do have a mix of federal and state laws, but then I think Ben already mentioned we do have a cyber defense strategy. We have the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So there's a combination of regulations which each come with reporting obligations. There could be requirements in relation to what you do with the affected data subjects as well, right? So essentially, when you look at all of these laws together, I think the common points are they do all focus on critical infrastructure more than anything else. So the level or the seriousness of an incident will depend on whether or not it involves critical infrastructure. There are incident reporting requirements that, again, are across all of these legislations. Some of them, for example, in India, are only limited to the regulator, but in others, you actually have to go notify data subjects as well. But what is interesting, and I think that's where most people sort of get stuck in navigating this, is the materiality thresholds, right? Because we don't have a common materiality threshold in determining when it is an incident that is of a serious or material nature and needs to be reported, and some others that are sort of routine, right? Even though it's cyber warfare. So I think these are some of the sort of points that we need to consider as far as dealing with multiple regulations, which, because of how the nature of these incidents are, it's sort of intrinsic that it will have multiple touch points, multiple regulators in multiple countries for us to be able to harmonize and find a uniform strategy. So I think we will come to some recommendations in terms of harmonizing this, but I just wanted to set out the state of play at this point to sort of bring to light that there is a disjointed framework and we don't have a common sort of international treaty that would, or a multilateral framework that would govern these incidents.
Thanks, Jyotsna. They're very insightful. Having focused on critical infrastructure and how laws address critical infrastructure in terms of not, in most cases, not proactiveness, but reactiveness, right? Let's do a deep dive into, for instance, where laws do not involve critical infrastructure. Let's take a use case, for instance, involving a specific group, right? Ben spoke about certain state-sponsored actors, and without getting into any geopolitical issues or anything like that, you have certain groups, which focus on these things. And with that, I'll invite Korafort to take the use case of telemarketers or telescammers in Thailand, and how personal data is harvested, what Thai law prescribes for certain activities relating to misuse of personal data, and what is the enforcement regime looking like? Korafort, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. And I also have prepared a slide presentation to show you that back in Thailand and over the Southeast Asian, we have seen a surge in online scammer operated by the group of we call it a tele scammer, but in Thai we call it call center gangs. They often based in the call center area called the Southeast Asia. And from Thailand, in this case, their bed is between the Thai and the Myanmar borders. These actors harvest the personal data to like a pitching, fake jobs, offers, and probably the even illegal sale of database by unauthorized brokers. So the stored data is then used to impersonate victim by the DeepSeek or something, or probably just use the AI to fake the phone call to you and make sure and just pretend to be your mothers or probably your relative or your friends who in the emergency and need the urgent monies and probably the open the mute bank account and also the tricks auto into the translating money or handling over the more sensitive information. These cases happen a lot over the Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Myanmar, and also the China's. Speak of the Thailand, in Thailand, we have a legal system has responded with a number of countermeasures. For the first of all, it's going to be like a Personal Data Protection Act, aka the PDPA, and the Computer Crime, and also the Money Laundering Acts. And on the international side, the Thai authorities have also the cooperate with the Interpol and also the regional body to investigate cross-border data misuse. But sadly, that the most victim that this group of tele scammer is target is going to be like a senior citizen or probably the people who already retired and they don't have much information about the AI. They have no idea what AI can do. So probably as of now, in Thailand, our current Prime Minister, she's daughter of Thaksin Shinawatra, Kun Paetongtarn. We have the enforcement still face the challenge, especially when it's come to the international framework. So recently, Thai authority has also started to use a more aggressive way, but straightforward approach by cutting off the electricities and also the internet in the areas where these suspect illegal call centers are operating, which in this case is border between Myanmar and Thai. This method used or done together with the police and also the help stop scammer from continuing their operating right away and also block them from accessing the stolen data or contacting more victims. I know that this some people might say that it's more aggressive because when we cut off the electricities, it means that all the hospitals, school, and any the facility that rely on electricity cannot rely on them. But the next slide I will show you how serious it is because these are the number of the victims that who got tricks and probably who got kidnapped to work in this call center and tele scammer facilities. You can see from the numbers, it's like a huge packet of the number that our Thai Prime Minister would like to take an action step to make sure that we can protect the Thai citizen and especially for the senior citizen from these tele scammers. I think this is a very good example of the first measure that Thai have like aggressive approach to defend with the tele scammer and also the one that use the S1 technology to trick money from the authors. Aaron?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks, Korafort. Now that we have an understanding in terms of what is the legal framework, Jyotsna's given a lay of the land in terms of, multiple regulators, interplay of privacy laws, laws pertaining to critical infrastructure. Korafort has given a use case specifically to Thailand at a micro level. Let's move on now. If you are advising an organization, right, what do you need to tell them to protect themselves against such attacks? What kind of perspective do we give businesses to take into account at an organizational, at a governance, at a technological level, to prevent such attacks? And for this, I'd like to bring Ben in.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. $1 million question, I think, but $3 million question, maybe. I think the important thing to do is to have a very holistic, multi-layered cybersecurity strategy. So you need to think about how you integrate your policies, the governance frameworks, the technological defenses, and wrap that all together. So again, I mean, we don't, this probably is a webinar for each particular section. So I'll be very sort of brief in terms of giving an overview. But I think for us, we use both defensive and offensive measures. Okay, so when I talk about defensive measures, what can we do? How secure is our data? How proactive can we be? And I think, you know, typically this starts at a governance level. It starts with the board. It starts with leadership. I was only this lunchtime speaking to an executive director of a company about this. Cybersecurity must be a C-suite priority. It has to be a priority. You have to have a chief information security officer who essentially reports to the board. The board have to understand their responsibilities around cyber. And then that hopefully should cascade down through the organization. And that can be just simply educating them on our cyber risk exposure, especially in the industries that we're involved in where we handle sensitive data. And structuring a cyber team, giving some thought to how we structure our cyber team, who they report to, how it works, and what is key. So I think that's number one. Number two, as we've already discussed, it's understanding the regulatory environment, the compliance environment. So are we compliant with the relevant cybersecurity regulations? That's probably a given, but important to understand. I think there's some very easy fixes. Do we have a third-party risk management process? Do we vet and audit our vendors, our suppliers? Do we look at their cybersecurity standards? Do we have some kind of contractual security requirements for third parties who are engaging with us, especially if they're connecting at some point to our systems? And then looking at continuity of service, so data loss prevention solutions, preventing data exfiltration, etc. Do we have measures in place to put that up in, and do we have adequate backup and recovery systems in place? Do we maintain regular encrypted backups of our data? And where are they stored? And who has access to that? So I think those are, I guess, sort of more proactive measures that should be considered. And then if we look more at you know, the employees, which is obviously where a lot of cyber criminals target the employees, because that's obviously where they can get good access. So what is our kind of situation in terms of employee awareness? You know, I know many companies do training where you have to watch a video for 5 minutes and answer a few questions, but is that really enough? I think a lot of employees are now quite used to getting emails supposedly from their president with a link to click, and they know now not to do that. So cyber criminals are becoming a lot more savvy in terms of how they get in front of employees. And, you know, through perhaps even personal emails, messaging apps, etc. So is our training relevant to the risk, I guess, is the question we need to ask. And then there's things like incident response planning. So you can do desktop exercises to talk about how we minimize damage during breaches. What is our process? What is our policy? Who do we reach out to? Who's our legal counsel, perhaps? Who's our IT professionals, and so on. I think one thing to do with that is to try and bring in stakeholders to take part in those exercises too. So for instance, key vendors, key clients, key suppliers to be part of that process. And then just basically hygiene around strong passwords, multi-factor authentication. I know this is kind of like telling people to wash their hands, but again, the basics are very important. Limiting user permissions based on job functions, regularly reviewing and revoking permissions. For instance, many companies have there's employees who've retired, no longer with the company, but potentially they still have permission to access if they can and if they need to. So those are some of the measures we take. I guess on the offensive side, that's where we, I think, sort of come into play more in terms of testing the vulnerability of infrastructure. So we do a lot of offensive measures for companies. We do penetration tests, and I know that's quite a common process companies go through, but a lot of very standard tests. There's a lot of softwares that monitor, look at, you know, cyber threats, etc. But as these things, as these threats develop and evolve, I think so should the penetration tests, so should the credibility of those tests. We do a lot of attack simulations outside in, so we can try and get into systems from the outside and understand how vulnerable your systems are. We can emulate attacks from certain states. So we know how they work, we know what they use and the methodologies, so we can do the same. So it's realistic simulations using bespoke tactics from real experts who've worked in governments or industries that have critical needs around cyber. We do a lot of work on the dark web, so identifying information relevant to our clients, which can often reveal information on things like credit reports, social media accounts, cryptocurrency usage, IP addresses, emails, passwords. So just taking a look and seeing, is our company exposed there in any way, can be quite a useful exercise. And then I guess, you know, there's your more basic kind of checks just to understand in terms more for operational side, looking at hardware and how that's structured. So some examples of that, we're doing a lot of work around battery storage or around renewable power plants, because at some point they obviously things connect to the grid. So we just have to understand whether we're using the optimal structure in terms of security around that. So there's some kind of proactive and some more reactive measures that can be taken. And I'm not sure. I'm sure the panel will tell me if I haven't covered them all. But I would say that's a good start in terms of trying to understand how mature our cyber risk approach is.
Thanks for that, Ben. Very holistic explanation. Some of them easier than you think, but not always implemented and effective. Let's maybe move on if, you know, I mean, we haven't divided this into parts, but let's say if we have, then let's look at the next part, right? The second part of this. Now, let's say we've taken into account everything of what Ben has recommended, but breaches are inevitable and a breach has happened, right? That's when the story, well, sort of, I wouldn't say starts. It starts, you know, to prevent the breach, but that's where the action starts, right? And I'd bring Liling in here. There's a breach that's happened. How do you advise businesses in terms of reporting, compliance, remedying, mitigating the risks involved in a breach? What is the ecosystem post a breach?
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, and yeah, I can see my slides.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, okay, thank you. And yeah, thanks for the introduction. And also, I'm just going to follow up a little bit more on what Joshna was sharing regarding the framework. And I totally agree with Joshna. It seems to be a real, there's a commonality amongst all the different jurisdictions in terms of post-systems attack, legal and reporting requirements. So just to, I will now drill down on what Malaysia has. And I believe that there are lots of similarities between Malaysia as well as the rest of the jurisdictions. So just to quickly mention, the act is the Cybersecurity Act. Actually, it's a very new act. It only came into force last year. And there is a specific regulation on notification of cybersecurity incidents. So I guess if an entity has been has a cybersecurity breach, then they will need to do reporting. If they are an NCII entity, and this is National Critical Information Infrastructure, and I believe that Josna was mentioning this as well. So if you are designated as an NCII entity by the sector lead, and I will mention all the different sectors that are in the Cybersecurity Act. Only if you are an NCII entity that you're obliged to do this notification. If you are not, then you are not mandated to do so. However, of course, it is always best to notify the regulator, which is the Cybersecurity Agency Malaysia. So as you can see, there is no threshold as such. It's any cybersecurity incident. So as long as there's a cybersecurity incident, which is this act on my slide definition, an activity or act which is carried out through a computer system that jeopardizes or adversely affects the cybersecurity of that computer system, then it's already deemed to be a cybersecurity incident. So I guess it really does affect quite a lot of people if this happens. But when it comes to NCII, it's only this particular definition, which is a system which the disruption or destruction of the computer system would have a detrimental effect on the delivery of the service. So in terms of the sectors, these are the different ones. The government, banking and finance, healthcare, defense and national security. So this is what is usually defined as the national critical infrastructure. These are the different sectors. So I think there is a commonality again with all the different jurisdictions as well. So as I said earlier, you will only need to report if you are designated as an NCI entity. So of course, these NCI entities, there's no that it's not publicized on the website or anything, because of course then there will be a target. And I believe that this is a very private notification by the regulator to the individual NCI entities. So when it comes to reporting, what you need to do, the moment that it occurs, then the authorized person will need to make an incident notification. And this is, of course, a very short timeline, is within 6 hours. But then, of course, from this 6 hours, the first notification, then you have time within 14 days to provide the additional information. So I guess it's not as scary as it looks, although to me, any cybersecurity incident is really a very wide definition. So I want to just quickly cover under the PDPA notification as well. Again, this act was gazetted quite some time ago, but there have been recent amendments to require or mandate data breach notification. And notification is required to be made to both the commissioner as well, a commissioner of the Personal Data Protection Agency, as well as the affected data subject. So this is not coming to force yet. It's only coming to force on the 1st of June, and only if the breach involves personal data. So, but this, of course, does not require you to be a NCII entity. You would, of course, if you are just any entity, but if you meet certain thresholds, like if there's a significant harm or significant scale, then it's really required to notify both the commissioner as well as the data subjects. So for this one, there are thresholds. It depends whether you come into this or not. So for example, if there's sensitive personal data involved, let's say a hospital, there's a breach in a hospital and lots of sensitive personal data is then released in the dark web, for example, then there is a high probability that the data controller would then need to notify both the commissioner and the data subjects. So as you can see from the slide, there is a threshold for the number of individuals. So only if the threshold is met that you're required to notify. That's one of the factors for significant scale. Okay, then we'll look now at the time frames. This is slightly better, but at the same time, no as well, because before you even if you're not sure whether there's been a breach occurred, while you're doing the investigations, you already have to notify, because it's 72 hours to the commissioner. To the data subjects, it's a bit longer. It's about 7 days. And that's the usual required information to be notified in the data breach notification. And the million-dollar question is, if an incident does an incident require compliance with both the Cybersecurity Act and the Data Protection Act? The answer is yes. If it results in both a cybersecurity incident and involves personal data, and it meets certain thresholds, then yes, you have to notify two different regulators. Last point is just on the penalties. I believe it's not as bad as certain countries, but still we have a criminal element and imprisonment, which I don't see that so often. 10 years under the Cybersecurity Act and 2 years under the PDPA for failure to notify breach. Okay, that's me. Aaron, thanks.
Thank you, Liling. Very interesting trend. After the GDPR came out, with the 72-hour deadline for personal breach reporting, we've seen an increasing trend in various countries introducing, this kind of a requirement. The 6-hour reporting requirement that you mentioned, also mirrored in the new, well, not new anymore, the cybersecurity regulations that came out in 2021, 2022 in India. Again, subject to certain exemptions. I believe even other countries like Indonesia have them now. So we're seeing an increased requirement by various regulators. In fact, going back to India, you have them by multiple industry regulators, for example, in the banking and financial services industry to report breaches. Within 72 hours, so on and so forth. So definitely, and going back to Jyotsna's point again, you have multiplicity in regulators and reporting requirements, compliance with privacy laws, cybersecurity laws, reporting to individuals, reporting to the regulator. So it's definitely an increased role, that we see now given the cyber attack frequency, right? I'd like to bring in Corafort at this stage, again, to focus a little bit more at a macro level, like Liling did so effectively for Malaysia. If you could, Corafort, come in and give us the landscape for Thailand, please.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lin, to share the inside thought of the Malaysia law, which I surprisingly is really similar with Thailand. But in Thailand, we just separate the data into like two batch, for like a personal data or probably the data that is very significant to the industry or probably to the business. Under the PDPA for the personal data, if personal data is compromised in a way that maybe impact the right and freedom of the data subject, the data controller must notify the PDPC within 72 hours, which I think is probably the same with the Malaysian. And if there is a high risk to individual, you also want to notify the affected person directly. We call that you need to report the data subject, outline that what happened and what is the risk of this data breach and how you mitigate the data breach. It's like you need to make sure that the data subject is comfort with the way you're gonna deal with the data that's got leaked. And also another one is in Thailand is gonna be the computer crime requirement. In the incident involved with the unauthorized access or probably attempting with the system or data is may also trigger the obligation under the computer crime that all the business operation must be obeyed. In such case, the organization may need to report to the Technology Crime Suppression Division, or in Thailand we call it the TCSD under the Royal Thai Police, and the Ministry of Digital Economic and Society, or aka ETDA, who can assist the technology evaluation. The law also mandates the organization to retain the log files for at least 90 days to make sure that if something happened or you got the malicious attack, you will have this kind of log report to submit to the officers. And the next, in Thailand, we call it the National Cybersecurity Committee. In this case, we have this organization to protect the critical information infrastructure, or CII, just like you say. But this is very controversial in Thailand right now because we also find the definition of let's say that a lot of the government agency, they also rely on the data center right now, but the data center is not protected under it's not defined as a critical infrastructure. So as of now, it's kind of controversial that what is the definition that we can make it to make sure that it's cover every facility that our government agency uses, because our government agency also to contain like a lot of the critical information infrastructure. And lately, I think in Thailand, we also would like to escalate the cybersecurity law to make sure that we can keep up with the digital economy. Right, John said is going to play like a very important role in Thailand in the next phase. And I also think that it's not just Thailand; it's probably covered all the Southeast Asia countries.
Thanks, Gaurav. Now that we've understood some of the legal requirements to adhere to in response to a cyber attack, right? I'd like to have Jay come in and talk to us about what does that translate to in terms of implementation for a company when we're talking resilience, strategy, business continuity, organizational measures, post a breach at an organizational level and not specifically at a legal level in terms of reporting and compliance level. What does an organization do post breach? Jay, over to you.
Thanks. It is well known for the fact that IT, there is definitely a gap between IT and legal in terms of understanding the requirements from a compliance and regulation standpoint. Now, what we have seen in terms of the trend here is, yes, there is data, there is personal data, but what we have seen from Cyber Resilience Act and the NIS2 and DORA, especially in Europe, a move away from looking at it from a pure data, whether it is sensitive or not, to that of at a process level. Do you have a right resilience to be able to uphold a payment system within a bank, for instance? Or do you have the right processes that is fully mapped from IT all the way to the business, that it comes to maintaining the core DNA of your organization if you're a retailer, order fulfillment, for instance? Fundamental questions now look into the organization's ability to generate, or if not, inability to generate revenue at an organization level. Now, what we see here are a multitude of different dynamics from what we have seen in the past. At an organizational level, that responsibility may reside with the CFO or the COO, so it's no longer pure IT or cybersecurity for that matter. So being able to, with the legal minds here on this virtual call, I think being able to understand and be able to persuade more from a legal perspective and the compliance perspective for those who are outside of the compliance and IT market, I think it's important. Secondly, when it comes to instant reporting, we all have regional and multi-dimensional customers, multi-geographical customers, and that have very different legal compliance landscape. So how do you train your instant response team to be able to work with different geos at such a protracted timeline when the response mechanism is becoming a lot more robust than ever before? And that creates fundamental challenges in terms of how to scale those responses across the globe. The last part is around testing. We haven't spoken that much about this today, but also becoming more topical than ever before. If you ask a IT department to recover one system, if they have the right backup, as Ben alluded to, if you have the right disaster recovery, yes, then you will be able to do it. But if you're talking about a process backup, then it becomes a lot more difficult because you need to have consecutive systems to work in tandem in order to recover a business process. And a lot of organizations are struggling to come to grips with, number one, how do you remain on the right side of the regulation? And that is a very difficult question. And then the second part of that is, how proactively do you test those environments to be able to recover them? And I think that also gives a bit more of a defense mechanism in terms of organizations' liability, but also to recover when it comes to to protect the core part of the business. That's it from me, Aaron.
Thanks, Jay. With that, we're well on track from a timing perspective. We've actually come to the end of our planned agenda for the session. We do have 3 or 4 minutes left, to end on time as promised. Are there any questions, from the audience? We had one or two which we took up during our conversation, but any other questions? I don't know if you have an option to unmute and ask, but please put it in the Q&A box, and we take them up now. But while you're typing your questions, I have a question, for the panel. In terms of key industry sectors, right? We spoke about various sectors during the course of our discussion. But I want to ask you all, and it's a bit of a, gazing into a crystal ball exercise, but if each of y'all could pick one industry that would be the most affected, during the course of the year, which ones do you all see? One each, please, but which ones do you all see the most affected by cyber attacks? Maybe Ben, you can go first, and then Jyotsna, Lailing, Jay, and Korafort.
Okay. You only can choose one. Okay. So I'm going to go for energy, because I think that we have done more work looking at companies who are concerned about the vulnerability of their infrastructure around renewable energy projects. So very briefly, that would be one that I would highlight.
Jyotsna?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go with financial services. I mean, it is a sector that you can see across jurisdictions is one that comes with a fair level of sophistication in terms of how our payment systems and banking systems are set up. But regardless, the kind of reach that it has, right? If there's an attack, because it also coupled with financial fraud, and money laundering and things like that. So I think basically the BFSI sector is one which is, sort of often targeted, particularly of those that are listed as well, because then it has a larger harm to the public and valuation and things like that.
Aaron, I'm going to go with transportation because today we just heard news that Malaysian airports had just received a ransomware demand for 10 million US dollars. So yeah, and it's the gateway to the country, right? So the airport. So for me, that would be quite crucial.
I hope someone from there is listening into our webinar.
No, I think.
Yeah.
And then if I were to say something, we in SK Shielders, we share our threat landscape report biannually, and so if financial services, government and public sector, of course, they are high on the list. But what I would say we are seeing more of, certainly in Korea, is in manufacturing, and not manufacturing in terms of the main creator of the parts, but it's supply chain, because it's easier. And there's a path of least resistance. And in some cases, you see those customers paying the ransom as well. So I think it's not necessarily about going for the crown jewels of organizations, but also going through the path of least resistance that holds the leverage for the companies to pay up.
Well, if you ask me, I would probably go for like telecommunication because in Thailand, a lot of people rely on the mobile application. And lately, we also trying to implement like a super app that control everything, just like in China that they have the Alipay. So back in Thailand, we provide our lot of the financial data and also the personal data in the telecommunication company. So it's going to be the target. It's going to be the big target for like a malicious attack.
Thanks, Korafort. Does anyone have any closing comments? Else, we'll close the panel. Thank you, firstly to the panelists, Jyotsna, Ben, Lailing, Jay, Korafort for, for doing this. Thank you all the attendees for joining in. Miriam, is there anything that you'd like to, close with? I know there's a message that you'd like to leave everyone before we, close the session. So, take it away.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you to all our guest speakers and panelists. It was such a wonderful discussion, and I hope that everyone had some kind of takeaway from today's session. So the IPBA, which is short for Inter-Pacific Bar Association, is an international association of more than 1,600 lawyer members with a strong interest in the Asia Pacific region. And these lawyers are based in over 65 jurisdictions, so it's a very diverse group of people. I would like to invite you to join the 33rd um, annual meeting and conference on April 23 to 26, 2025, this year in Chicago. The conference will focus on transformation everywhere all at once, business and law in a changing world. So there's so much to look forward to, from multiple panel sessions, lunches, dinners, and other activities, including golf tournaments, a cruise, and a Dodgers game. So thank you everyone for joining us, and please consider joining the IPB as well, including the conference in Chicago. Have a good afternoon, good evening, good morning.
Thanks, Miriam. Okay, then. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day and a good night ahead. Thank you. Bye-bye.